Hello, this is World Business Report from the BBC World Service, where we bring you the latest in money, marketing, manufacturing, and yes, much, much more. Please review us, rate us, share us wherever you can. BBC podcasts are supported by advertising. This is World Business Report from the BBC World Service. Hello, I'm Mike Johnson. In the programme ahead, a narrow victory for Justin Trudeau and his Liberal Party in Canada. He's failed to win what he most hoped for, an overall majority in Parliament. We'll have reaction from business and hear what the results might mean for the Canadian economy. Also today, pipeline politics. As global energy prices spiral higher, is Russia to blame? And the world's biggest music label, Universal, gets a rapturous reception from investors on its share market debut.
Historically, the music industry, certainly in terms of the larger music corporations, have generally been seen as a safe investment.
All that and more on the way over the next half an hour. It was a gamble, but it didn't pay off in the way Justin Trudeau wanted. Canada's Prime Minister called a snap general election, hoping to win a majority in Parliament. While he is set to return to power for a third time, it will be as part of a minority government, and that could make it hard to push through change. Mr Trudeau nonetheless thanked the voters who'd helped him win.
What we've seen tonight is that millions of Canadians have chosen a progressive plan. Some have talked about division, but that's not what I see. That's not what I've seen these past weeks across the country. I see Canadians standing together in your determination to end this pandemic, together for real climate action, for $10 a day childcare, for homes that are in reach for middle-class families, for our shared journey on the path of reconciliation.
Canada is battling a fourth wave of the pandemic. Justin Trudeau had hoped Canadians would reward his handling of it and relatively smooth vaccine rollout by returning him with a strong majority so he wouldn't need opposition support to pass his agenda. That, though, has not happened. I've been hearing more from the journalist Jatinder Sidhu in Vancouver.
Well, the Liberals are heading for 158 seats in the House of Commons. That is 12 short of a majority. And they had 157 going into the election. So almost no change. Pretty much a standstill election is what Canadians are calling it. The opposition Conservative Party, who really had hoped to talk about economic recovery and a more prudent approach to running the country, bringing Canada's ballooning deficit under control, they lost seats from 121 to 119. So the opposition is not really in a place to supplant Justin Trudeau for some time to come. Justin Trudeau will need the support of the third party in Canadian politics, the New Democratic Party led by Jagmeet Singh. They, again, almost at a standstill from 24 up to 25. There are a few races, a few ridings here in Canada that are still at play, but it's a mere handful and not really enough to make any significant difference.
So what do Canadians make of all of this then?
Well, today's headline in one of the political magazines, the election that disappointed everyone. So the conventional wisdom is that calling a snap election when people didn't want it, that sort of row fizzles after a week or two. But right across this country, people said over and over they're angry. Voices I heard just around and about, I just don't trust Trudeau anymore. He's so smug. I voted Liberal before, but not now. I spoke to a variety of people in Vancouver, all running small businesses of various kinds, what they made of the election, and would anything change for them given the outcome?
To be honest, I don't think there's going to be a lot of change. Things will carry on as they were. I think it was just a waste of money. I don't think Mr. Trudeau should have called the election in the first place. Everything was running fine. I think it was a power grab, and I think he failed, but he just wasted $610 million or whatever it's going to cost.
We did get a lot of funding during COVID, which was really helpful, especially the childcare sector. So that's where I'm in. I found that they did sort of take care of the little person, but we'll see if they're going to be able to make any decisions with kind of how things are rolling out.
I think that Liberal minority government is a positive. A coalition government is probably what's needed in Canada. I believe everybody, all the parties, are going to look after small businesses. You know, the Liberal government has been beneficial in terms of making sure supports were there during COVID, but I think that there's more needed in terms of the social securities in our country right now.
The problem in Canada, I think, today is we don't know who's better. We just hope for the best. We have to believe in someone eventually.
That's the thoughts there of some people in Vancouver. So, Jatinder, where is the economy going now? What does all of this bode for Canada under the next government of Justin Trudeau?
Justin Trudeau has been given begrudging permission to carry on. His government is no more stable than it was before the election. He is possibly looking towards another election within 18 months. There are significant tensions across Canada. A significant story of this election is the rise of the right-wing People's Party of Canada. They're an anti-immigration party. And for the opposition Conservatives, they tried to bring their policy platform to the centre, albeit with that fiscally prudent emphasis on controlling Canada's deficit. But they didn't make any significant inroads, and there is talk that they will themselves, Erin O'Toole, the leader of the Conservatives, will face leadership challenges. So for Justin Trudeau, he says he's got a clear mandate to get Canada through this pandemic, but he will have to rely on coalition or parliamentary support from outside his party.
Journalist Jatinder Sidhu speaking to me from Vancouver. To the financial markets now, where on Tuesday shares in Europe and the US have been recovering some of their pretty steep losses of the past few days. Brian Torer is from the investment company JM Fin. Brian, just recap why shares have been so volatile and why things are looking a bit more positive in Europe and also the US today.
We've had a few problems that have been unsettling investor confidence. First of all, we've got worries about inflation. It does seem to be building in all the developed economies. We've also had this spike in gas prices. Now, we've heard a lot about it in the UK because of the effect it may have on such things as food production, but the reality is it impinges all over the world and is actually reckoned to be a possible factor in slowing the economic recovery. And then, of course, we have this problem in China with Evergrande, which is a property company, second largest in China, but the most heavily indebted property company in the world, looking as though it may actually go under. And that's been very unsettling for markets, as indeed has all the Chinese action against various companies. And, of course, that's what triggered the problems in Evergrande. Now, as far as the recovery is concerned, perhaps we're getting a little bit more sanguine about whether or not Evergrande can be sorted out. Maybe gas prices will come under control, and perhaps inflation is only going to be transitory. But we've also had quite a lot of bid activity in the market here. There is a story, and it is, I have to emphasize, only a story at this stage, that an American company is going to bid for Entain, the massive online betting company that owns things like, for example, Ladbrokes. Now, that's a big story which could break any moment. And, of course, we have the bid of National Express for Stagecoach, two of our big bus companies. Let's face it, bus companies have had a very rough run recently. So the fact that they're thinking of getting together is no surprise at all.
OK, Brian, thank you very much indeed. That's Brian Torer there from the investment company JM Fin. We'll have a little bit more on those gas prices in just a second. Let's just check on the market numbers, though. First of all, shares, London's main index down almost 1.5% higher, just over the 7,000 barrier again at 7,001. The Dow in New York, that's up almost 1% at 34,300. Well, for the past probably week or so now on the programme, we have been talking about the fallout from rising energy prices. Over the next 10 minutes or so, we're going to be taking an in-depth look at the consequences for business, including the food industry, and hearing about the role of Russia in the whole affair. Here's the BBC's Ed Butler.
It is all about the global price of raw natural gas, which has almost trebled since the start of 2021, reaching record highs. for a number of reasons, it seems, from a surge in economic demand to a lack of container ships around the world to generally increased demand in Asia. Its fallout could be wide-ranging. For one thing, some reckon it could dent progress at this year's crucial UN climate summit. A squeeze on gas may make some energy-hungry governments look again at their plans to cut coal consumption, for instance. But there may be a big cost for businesses too. Higher energy prices could lead to all types of challenges. Sven Holster identifies a few. He's the Norwegian president and CEO of Yara, Europe's second largest producer of commercial fertilizer.
The way you need to think about fertilizer production is that it goes through two steps. The first one, where we take natural gas and convert that into ammonia, and then we use ammonia to produce finished fertilizer. At the moment, with the very high natural gas prices in Europe, we have curtailed around 40% of our ammonia production in Europe this week. But as a result of Yara being a global company, we were able to optimize and then source ammonia from other parts of the world, bring that into Europe so that we are able to maintain our finished fertilizer production in Europe.
But you're cutting ammonia production by 40%. That has knock-on effects, does it, for general CO2 production, which is something else you're involved in, am I right?
CO2 production is a byproduct of ammonia production, and that is something that is going into, amongst others, the food production and to industrial uses. So there are some impacts to the deliveries of that, of course.
Does that mean that there's going to be a crunch in the fizzy drink supply across Europe?
It's not necessarily an immediate impact, and there are opportunities to find financially viable solution to provide that product if it is needed.
Jokingly, I talk about fizzy drinks, but it is a wide range of uses, carbon dioxide, isn't it? Stunning animals for slaughter is one use. Food packaging, boosting the shelf life of food products is another. So CO2 has a lot of industrial applications. It does show, I suppose, just how complex and widespread the implications are of this short-term crunch in gas prices.
It's impacting a number of industries in the short term, and it is important that we balance the short-term impact with also implementing changes for the longer term. And what we're seeing now is indeed hitting the food system, and the food system itself is a major contributor also to global emissions. And let's not forget that climate change is part of the equation. We've seen a cold winter, we've had a hot summer, we've had droughts, we've had floods, and now recently less wind than normal as well. So it's important that we look at the totality of this, and we have structures in place to support the farmers, and that we have policies also to support more production of renewable energy. Consumers are hurting from higher utility bills, businesses are suffering as well, and also farmers are suffering now. They don't have the margins to be able to absorb significant cost increases.
So how much are you going to be pushing up prices when it comes to January, February, when farmers, I guess, will be starting to think about putting a lot of fertilizer on their land ahead of the new growing season next year? Are they going to be looking at much higher prices for these inputs?
That's not up to us. These are global prices, and we need to follow that. And it's impacted both by the raw materials cost, but also the affordability for the farmers and the consumers. So this is a dynamic picture.
Longer term, would it be your anticipation that consumers across Europe are going to be looking at higher food prices as a result of this gas crunch?
I think there are a lot of activities that we can do within the food system in order to make it more resilient, to reduce waste, and through that maintaining food prices. Shorter term, of course, all industries that are dependent on energy are impacted by what we're seeing right now, and so is production of fertilizer, so is the production of food at farm level. So we're all impacted by this.
This is going to have a knock-on effect on food prices, you think?
It already has had that impact, yes.
Sven Hollister, the CEO of the European fertilizer giant Yara. But there is one big factor that everyone's debating. It's Russia, Europe's biggest gas supplier, and its new, very controversial pipeline that's just been completed from its shores all the way under the Baltic Sea to Germany.
The Nord Stream 2 project is the largest job within Oslo's history. 2 pipelines, 48-inch, total length of around 2,400 kilometers.
That's a promotional video for Nord Stream 2, as the pipeline is known. It's been talked about and argued over for years now. For the first time, it allows gas to bypass Ukraine and other Central European countries, preventing them from charging a fee for gas delivery. And Ukraine has depended on that money partly to offset the massive costs of Russian-backed rebels fighting and occupying land around its borders. In other words, this is all politically very charged indeed. And some experts reckon the entire gas crisis has been manufactured by Russia to force European governments to accept this pipeline despite their reservations. Dieter Helm is a professor of economic policy at the University of Oxford.
The Nord Stream pipeline are designed both for the purposes of providing gas, of course, directly into the German market, but also for the purposes of bypassing Ukraine, or at least being able to threaten to bypass Ukraine. So there's a political game here. It's a long game. It goes back before the invasion and annexation of Crimea. And this plays, shall we put it this way, very much to the Russian tune.
The argument would be that Russia is trying to bypass Ukraine and its need to pay transit fees when it sends gas through Ukraine. And it's doing that for political reasons, but also for economic ones?
Yes. If you have threat of an alternative route, the bargaining power of Ukraine falls very substantially. But also you've got to bear in mind that Russia is overwhelmingly dependent on fossil fuel exports. That's what makes its economy stack up. So if you want to extract the maximum value for Russian gas, you want to make sure that you've got direct market access and dependency. You want people to feel that they have to contract in advance just in case something like this happens. And you want, on the other hand, to try to blunt the effect of LNG as alternative supplies. This is a complicated situation, both economic and political. But let's put it another way around. If Russia was to push new volumes into Europe now, we would not be in the state we're in now.
Gazprom, Russia's principal gas producer, denies the criticism that Russia or it is manipulating this crisis. They point out that they have met all of their long-term supply contracts. Taps have not been turned off in the last few months. Some countries like Germany have even received higher supplies from Russia this year.
Of course, there are long-term gas contracts, and it's not that the long-term contracts are not being honoured. They are. It's that the short-term additional supplies of gas are not being provided. It could put additional short-term gas into the market. That's what you would normally do. But of course, the permits for the Nord Stream 2 are up for grabs at the moment, and Russia wants to make sure people understand that they should get that done. The most important thing from the Russian perspective is for Europe to see Nord Stream as a primary route and therefore wean off Europe's dependency on that Ukrainian pipeline.
With regard to Nord Stream, just summarise where we've got to. The pipeline is completed, but no gas is currently running through it for sale.
So the pipeline has a long checkered history with strong American opposition until Biden changed his mind very recently, and with, of course, opposition from Eastern Europe, because the obvious place to put the pipeline was straight through Poland, and the pipeline was deliberately bypassing Poland. So the pipeline has finally got completed as Biden withdrew the American sanctions against the firms involved in it, and Gazprom took the lead in delivering it there. But to get the thing up and running, you need to get through the last permitting stages, etc. And of course, from a Russian perspective, perfectly understandably, you want that job done.
So right now, your reading is if the Germans gave the thumbs up to this pipeline being opened and gas pumping through it, you anticipate this crisis kind of goes away pretty fast.
This crisis doesn't need to really exist in the first place. This is a perfectly solvable problem. It's a question of the will to do that. And it could be over really quickly, but it would take Russia to act. And Russia must be reflecting now on whether this is doing its long-term gas market a lot of damage. It could be dragged out, and the worry would be that you go into the coldest parts of winter and you have a high-pressure system over Europe. Then you have a serious and continued crisis on your hand right through until next spring.
Which will mean prices doubling again.
We're pretty close to the top of the prices. They're so high that, fertilizer factories are closing, all sorts of large industrial users are cutting back on production. So we've hit the point where the price pain is starting to hit demand. My guess is that we're going to see these continuing high prices unless Russia steps up to the plate and unless we get very lucky with the wind.
That's Dieter Helm from Oxford University, ending that report by Ed Butler. You're listening to World Business Report from the BBC World Service. Now, the music label Universal is home to some of the world's biggest artists.
Always words I don't just say, and nothing else matters. Give me a million reasons, giving me a million reasons, about a million reasons I bow down. And you better start swimming or you'll sink like a stone, or the times they are a-changing.
The unmistakable sound of Bob Dylan, and before him Lady Gaga, and at the beginning Metallica. Also on the Universal roster are Billie Eilish and Taylor Swift. Oh, and the biggest selling band in the history of popular music, the Beatles. Like other labels, it was once threatened by piracy. In the streaming age, though, profits have soared. From today, you can buy your own slice of the music machine that is Universal. Shares in the business have made their debut on the Amsterdam stock market, and they've jumped in value on their first day's trading. Universal is owned by the French media giant Vivendi. Dr. Matt Grimes is an expert on the music industry at Birmingham City University in the English Midlands. Why did he think investors were so keen to get a share of Universal?
Historically, the music industry, certainly in terms of the larger music corporations, have generally been seen as a safe investment. I think it'd be fair to say that music is absolutely intrinsic to who we are as human beings. So it's a pretty safe bet if you're going to be investing in a large music corporation.
Yeah, and it doesn't seem like long ago when we were talking about the threat of music, piracy, that kind of thing. And yet streaming now seems to have led to a bit of a recovery for the music industry, doesn't it?
In some respects it has. I mean, we have to remember we're slowly coming out of an era of COVID where, there has been a number of restrictions on these sort of revenue streams that the music industry generally tends to rely on, one of those obviously being the live sector. And I think with the live sector, of course, where that has pretty much come to a standstill, the music industries or the various music businesses, whether they be small to medium enterprises right up to the major corporations, have had to be really creative and innovative in trying to find revenue streams where they would have relied on live music, because the live sector does provide quite a large revenue stream for the record companies or the music businesses. Streaming has, in many respects, filled that void a bit. I don't want to over-egg the importance of it, because we know that the streaming companies and the returns that artists get and the returns that the record companies get from the streaming is relatively small. Musicians and music businesses have been very innovative. We've seen a number of artists do their own live streaming from their studios, engaging with their audiences, which is a really, really important part of being an artist. Perhaps what Universal are looking at here is if you can spin off, I think it's 60% of Universal is going on the stock exchange. If you can generate a large stream of income from that, one could argue that might put you in a position to start contesting the current streaming services, perhaps produce a streaming service of your own, perhaps in collaboration with the other major record corporations, that starts to squeeze that market, and you can see greater returns for your artists and for your business.
Yeah, and it's got to be said, doesn't it, that even though streaming is giving a whole range of opportunities to put music before people, smart speakers, connected cars, TikTok, etc., the people on whom the industry depends, the content creators, the bands and the singers, have been saying for years, look, this is a party to which we've not been invited. We're losing out.
As you're probably aware, during the summer there was a whole tranche of discussions with the Department of Culture, Media and Sport in the UK, and they need to change their business model that actually starts to reward the artist rather than, one could argue, punish the artist. And that's about letting go of some of that revenue stream and ultimately, I suppose, some of that market share. I think certainly big streaming services like Spotify and Apple Music will be watching this sell-off very, very closely, and how that might impact on their own relationship with these large record companies in terms of the amounts of money that they're having to pay over to them in terms of the copyright that the artist or the record company owns. Because obviously every time a stream is played, whoever owns the rights to that music is the people that get paid. But we know that it's very, very small figures at the moment.
And we've seen a lot of these big labels, Universal with Bob Dylan, for example, going around buying up the back catalogues of some of the biggest names in music history, haven't they? So they're spending big up front and hoping, I guess, to get a guaranteed almost revenue stream in the years to come.
I don't want to seem morose about this, but normally back catalogues tend to be owned by the record company. And of course, when a popular famous artist passes away, then there's a whole tranche of re-releases and remasters and, that then come out. And of course, established artists are looking at that and going, well, do you know what? I need to be thinking to some degree about my pension. And actually, I could do more with the money now than I could do with it once I've passed away. They can do a lot more with that money. They can start to take back ownership of some of their copyright for their music as well. They can start investing in new projects. And these are some of the things that some of the larger music companies have been slightly reticent to do, is invest in music, because obviously it's been a very difficult 18 months.
Dr. Matt Grimes, Senior Lecturer in Music Industries and Radio at Birmingham City University in the UK. That's all from us for now. Thanks for listening to this World Business Report.